Okay, so I believe we are live, and if you're there, say hello, let us know where you're from. Hi, I'm Dr. Rebecca Jorgensen, and you are here for Trainer Talk. We're glad to have a bunch. It's always fun when EFT therapists get together and hang out a little bit and talk about couple therapy and EFT. And I have here with me today Dr. Scott Woolley, who is from the Training and Research Institute for Emotionally Focused Therapy and the San Diego Center for EFT, both of which we are partners together at. And so it's really fun to have you here, Scott. But I do want to say something else about you, because Scott has traveled around the world teaching EFT as part of his university position at Alliant International University, where he was for many, many years the system-wide director for the marriage and family therapy program, which has been a really big deal and a lot of work. And so he's a professional prof and administrator. And so it's just so great. And one of the original American trainers for emotionally focused therapy. So welcome, Scott. It's so great to have you here.
Great, thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Hi. Hi, and so we've got some people kind of signing in to say hello. And today we're going to talk about using EFT with affairs to help heal affairs. It's one of the most difficult things about couple therapy. And I think we get better and better at it. And the process is certainly great for helping couples. And more and more couples are coming through affairs. In fact, I think even society feels a little bit differently about couples healing from affairs than they used to. Would you say, Scott?
Yes, I do. I think people are starting to recognize, at least some people in some areas, that affairs really can be healed, that relationships can go on, they can rebuild trust, they can rebuild safety. And I think that's a good thing, because part of what you have to battle very early on is the hopelessness problem. Is people feel like there's nothing we can do, this is the end of our relationship, it's the end of our marriage, and that is generally just not true. So
the other thing I think that's kind of shifting in society is that, I mean, there's a still shame, and there's a lot of shame around affairs, but there used to be so much shame about staying with a partner and choosing that path to recovery, and that seems to be shaking up a little bit. And I do want to say, before we get too much farther into the topic, that at the end of the webinar, Scott, maybe we can talk a little bit about the Creating Connections conference. I'm very excited about helping people know about it, and I'm going to offer some bonus trainings, some downloadable and streamable products for people at the end, whoever wants to hang out. So maybe some of you are already going to be attending, and that'd be fun too. But just to let you know kind of what's coming up towards the end, since the next time we'll really have a chance to be together, a bunch of us EFTers, is at that conference.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to be a great conference, and I'm excited about it.
So we'll spend a little time at the end talking about it. So jumping into affairs, thank you for being here, so many of you, and the questions that you sent in before as part of your registration. So Scott and I have been reviewing those questions, and we really appreciate you sending them. And hello, we see, I don't know if you can see the chat, Scott, but people are signing in from all over, from different states around the US, as well as from outside of the country. So we have people from Holland and just all over. So thank you for being here from all these many places.
Great, yeah.
So let's kind of go with one of the first questions. You know, sometimes clients want to know more about affairs and affair recovery. So, you know, what do you offer in the way of additional reading material or homework, or, you know, how do you do some psychoed? Kind of what do you offer folks?
Well, first, actually, I think I think affairs often usually are major traumas for couples, and they oftentimes come in a trauma place, and psychoed and reading is actually really helpful. And you know, Sue in her trauma couples book talks about the importance of psychoeducation and just instructing people, helping them understand that, you know, affairs do happen, they can be healed, it can be understood, and it's hard work, but it is good. There's several kind of resources that I kind of send people to read. It depends if they're readers or not. Some people are readers, some people are not readers. Many people go to the internet. There's a lot of junk on the internet. There's some good stuff on the internet. One of the sites, it's a little old, but it's got a lot of good, there's a lot of downloadable material on it, and it's also pretty research-based. It's called Dear Peggy, and it was done by Peggy Vaughn, who passed away about 4 years ago, which is why I say it's a little old, because she hasn't been updating it because she's gone. But the site itself is still up, and there's a wealth of material on there. She did a huge study under John Gottman, actually, or associated with John Gottman, a number of years ago on affairs, and did really one of the first really good research studies. And she's got lots and lots of material. So that's dearpeggy.com. Another one, just a few books. Another one is Shirley Glass's book, Not Just Friends. And again, that's a few years old now, but again, another book that was based in lots of research and
yes.
also written for the general public. It's got a lot of helpful information in helping people not only kind of organize and understand what just happened, because for many couples, it's like a bomb just blew up in the middle of their relationship, and they're trying to figure out, you know, it's like, whoa, what just happened? But also for couples as they're healing. Another one I recommend is After the Affair by Janice Abrams. And there's, you know, a number of good ones out there besides that as well. These are just ones that I refer people to.
Right. So I think the general emphasis is that we're careful what resources we send people to, that we're using research-backed resources, because there's a lot of anecdotal stuff out there, and there's a lot of things that over the long haul aren't particularly helpful to people if they get their hands on them. So, you know, for me, I always like to make sure that I've read it, I know something about it, also have a couple good recommendations from it before I recommend it. Yeah, it's because it's backfired on me a couple of times to recommend things, and then I find out there's pockets of stuff in the book or in the resource that don't really fit with the research on recovery. So I think, you know, as a general rule, that's always been a helpful thing to me to kind of, or to at least I have a disclaimer, you know, maybe I've read the book and think, you know, there's some spots in here that I don't particularly agree with. But both of those resources that you gave, of course, you originally recommended to me. So I've read both of those and think they're quite helpful. And
they're not perfect. They're not perfect. I don't know that I agree with everything in them. But, you know, and same with Peggy Vaughn's stuff. I mean, you know, I think she at times goes in directions I wouldn't go. She didn't have the advantage of EFT. But there's just a lot of good, you know, the closer people stay to the research, I think the better off their material is. That's my own bias.
Right. So we have that experience, and then I guess we could say to you, the rest of you, you may have some favorite resources too. So go ahead and put those in the chat box. Let's share those, because we're not the only, you know, we're EFT experts, but we're not the only experts on healing some of these things. And many of you are very expert and masterful as well. So go ahead, feel free to share in the chat box any resources that you particularly like as well. Shirley Glass was the other book. She's written several, and the one that Scott was recommending today was After the Affair. Is that right?
Well, no, not just Friends.
No. Not Just Friends. Sorry.
Right. After the Affair is by Janice Abrams, but Not Just Friends.
I got it mixed up. Not Just Friends.
Shirley Glass's stuff, I think, is excellent. Unfortunately, she's another one that passed away. Those of you in America.
I like all of her books as well.
But they're all excellent. Her son is Ira Glass, who is on NPR. If you're in America and listen to NPR. But anyway, her stuff is really strong. It's research-based. It's solid stuff.
Yeah, it's really nice. Okay, so let's see. Let's move to another question. And if questions come up while we're going along, please do ask them. So what do you do? One tricky spot is, of course, early on. Like we have this affair recovery model, but it's a stage 2 process in and of itself, but we're not ignoring the affair. So maybe we can talk a little bit about what we do early. Not everyone comes in a crisis, actually. You know, not everyone comes in right after discovery. Many people are coming in very much delayed, but sometimes, you know, I mean, it certainly happens too right afterwards. So when that's the case, you know, how do we kind of deal with the crisis, start to work on the cycle, and not ignore the affair?
Right. So you're saying when people are not in crisis? Is that what you're saying?
Or when they are. When they
are in crisis. Yeah. So when they are in crisis, you have to deal with the intense emotions of the crisis. You can't, I mean, I've seen therapists sometimes try to, let's say, we got to get the cycle down. And when people are just so traumatized and upset, and really you need to sit with their pain to begin with. And you need to help them kind of start to make sense out of it. But more than anything, they need to be validated. They need to feel heard. Their pain you need to begin to start organizing it. One of the important things to do early on is to kind of head off any suicide, homicide, social media, because sometimes people are so angry they go to Facebook and, can you believe what he did? You know, this is what he did, kind of thing. And they start, you know, broadcasting it, which really can make huge problems. They go to family members, to others that then take sides and make it very difficult later on. And so I try to kind of head that stuff off. I see it very much like crisis counseling, because it is crisis counseling. And,
it is, right.
And you know, my goal always in a first session is to help people feel deeply heard and understood. If they know I get their pain, the depth of the betrayal, and then I'm also have a kind of a quiet confidence, not a cheerleader confidence, but a quiet confidence that this can be worked through, it's helpful for people, okay? I absolutely encourage, it depends on kind of where they are, but again, I want to make sure there's no assessment, no suicide, etc. But then giving them some tasks to work on during the week, and part of that can be get a book and start reading. Part of that can be, you know, depending on whether they're living together or not. I mean, they can, you know, kind of come up with how they're going to make it through the next week. You know, and some of that can be basic self-care kinds of things. I need you to keep your exercise up. I need you to, you know, do what you can to make sure that you're sleeping. I need you to eat even if you don't feel like eating, you know, and find really good, you know, healthy food. And then oftentimes in a first session where it's just kind of come out and it's very raw, we talk about who knows and who they are going to want to or they could share with to find support. And oftentimes they don't want to let anybody know. And that's great, except that they do need to get some support. And so oftentimes I will refer them also to some individual therapy as well, just to, particularly so that they have somebody to talk with. When I do that, I try to be very careful to make sure that that individual therapist has an EFT framework, and I have the luxury of doing that because I'm in San Diego now, and is going to support that and support the relationship, and that I've got an open, be able to talk with that therapist. But these are all things to just kind of help people through that initial than the initial week. And sometimes, normalizing the not sleeping, the not eating, the not being able to think clearly, and doing some basic problem solving about how am I going to get through the next week is helpful for people.
Yeah. Yeah. So it really, that's so important to just be thinking about it as a crisis. It is a crisis. And that's the first order of business, is to take care of the crisis components of it and help people kind of gain a bit of balance back, because you can't do a bunch of therapy and healing and recovery work while the crisis is happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So then let's go to the next question, which is how to help the injuring partner be less defensive, because that shame can come up and they can be quite defensive. How do you help them be less defensive so they're more open to healing, to feeling and responding to the hurt of their partner?
This is one where attachment theory is incredibly helpful, okay? Because the attachment reframes are very powerful in helping people not get caught in shame and guilt, etc., particularly in shame. A lot of times people get defensive because they have shame or they're afraid to be blamed. As a guy said recently, I ended up having this affair because our marriage has been so horrible for so many years, and I felt so rejected. And one of the things I don't want to do is go back. If I kind of eat humble pie here, it's just going to go back to her badgering me, and I'm even more the bad guy I was before, and I'm not going to do that. Which is really, that it was well articulated. And I said, absolutely, that is not where we want you to be. And that's about the negative cycle you guys were in all these years. And she is hurting because you are important. She's hurting because she actually loves you and you're important to her. That's why she's hurting. And even though you don't feel it, and you haven't felt it all these years, okay? This guy, in fact, was kind of amazed, because he thought, I didn't think she loved me. I didn't think she would care. And in fact, she was deeply hurt because she does love him and she does care. She just was an angry, critical pursuer. And
that's also why they're at therapy. That's also why she's, consented and or even initiated therapy.
Because she wants to work on it. That's exactly right. I think another piece, though, is people get caught in their own shame about, I'm a bad person because I did this. And they feel guilty, they feel bad because they did it, okay? I do not, I'm going to say first what I think is not helpful there, and then I want to talk about what is helpful. I do not believe it's helpful to minimize the significance of what the person has done. It's not okay to say, well, anybody would have done it in this situation, or it's not that big a deal. Lots of people have affairs. I don't think that that's helpful, okay? I think that it's much more helpful to say something like, yeah, you feel bad because really having an affair, betraying your wife, your husband, your vows, your beliefs is against your belief system. And you feel bad because you don't want to hurt people, because inside you are a good person.
Yeah.
When we do bad things, if we're good people inside, we will feel bad. Bad people who do bad things don't feel bad, okay? Because it aligns with their value system. Right. They like to hurt people, it's fine, whatever.
Right, they accomplished something they wanted.
They accomplished something they wanted. And those are not the people who are in our therapy rooms typically. They may not want to feel bad because they may feel justified and they may be holding on to their justification. But when they see the pain in the other person, if they go into that means I'm bad, that's a shame block. And doing the reform, actually it means you're important. And the fact that you feel bad is an indication that you're a really good person. And that you just didn't live according to your belief system or your values. Those reframes can be very powerful at the right time under the right, particularly a right emotional moments.
Yeah. It's so important whenever we're doing reframing and psychoed, I think both, that they're both really, we're doing them out of the attunement and close to the emotional experience, that neither one of them, you know, that attunement's what's going to help us kind of know that we're not doing psychoed, you know, from head to head, that we're doing it out of that emotional need for understanding. And the same thing with those reframes, because that's what the reframing does, is help expand that sense of understanding. And so we need to be doing that through our attunement. Yeah. Okay. And Petra's here, Petra from the Netherlands, who says
Wonderful.
How much it feels like joggling, you know, with like flaming torches or something, or juggling, you know, with flaming torches. The cycle before, the cycle after, the injury. And I think that's really true. And Petra, actually, I will say, has written a book on affair recovery in Holland. And so knows very well, because it's part of the specialty of her practice. So thank you for mentioning that, Petra. And it is, I think that's one of the difficulty about doing the affair recovery work, is that our capacity to hold a lot of threads at a time is important. I can remember, like, when I was learning to crochet and learning to knit, you know, that as you get better, you add on these other colors and you switch in and between different ones. And you may have a couple different ones. There's probably a lot of women that can relate to this, on the hook at the same time. And in EFT, that's what we're doing. We're keeping kind of hold of these different emotional threads. What was it like before? What's happening now? How we're moving into recovery. That partner's experience, this partner's experience, and we're kind of holding those different threads and emphasizing different ones at different times, and keeping in mind the other one. So I think that's probably what's most tricky about learning it, Scott. Is that kind of what you found?
Absolutely, yes. No, I have found it. And even though I've been doing this work for a long time, it still can be tricky. One of the things I sometimes will do when it's hard to balance or it's not always clear is I will make it explicit to the couple. We've got several things we need to do here. You turning to the person who's been deeply injured by the affair, saying to him or her, your pain has got to be heard. I need to understand it. You need support in this moment, okay? Turning to the other person, you also need to be heard and understood. We have got to figure out how you guys got here, okay? Right. We have to figure out how you guys got here. And we also have to figure out how to help you just manage the next few weeks in this, you know, and ultimately heal this. And we're going to be moving back and forth, okay? Some of it might be managing the stress of the trauma right now. Some of it might be just you guys need to feel heard and understood. Some of this may need to be, we need to go back and figure this out. And, you know, what led to the affair, and most importantly, how we're going to make sure this never happens again, and how we're going to rebuild trust. Okay, and so please, if we're in one place and you feel like we need to work in one of these other areas, let me know. This is a collaborative effort. Let me know. Okay, and because I may not know
it's just
how badly
so helpful.
Yeah,
it's so helpful just to have the idea of, and some of the words you're using around that, Scott, around you know, framing the recovery and being transparent around what we're trying to do and keeping that kind of in mind. Sue talks about that in her trauma book as building a platform of safety. look at, this is where we are, this is what we're trying to do, this is where we're going. And sometimes, you know, if I'm moving too fast or you feel another area of emphasis, that's important because it is collaborative. So learning to say those kinds of things out loud and to your clients is really important.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So let's see. Next question, Scott. Do you see any differences? Maybe we can talk about the differences in issues that come up if the affair has been long and ongoing, you know, like I'd say a year, but the questioner asked, you know, if it's more than 3 years, a long-term affair versus, you know, short-term or a one-night stand kinds of things.
Right. Right. If it's a long-term affair going on with one person for, you know, as the questioner said, 3 years, you really, and really to a degree, with all affairs, you have to kind of figure out what the interpersonal as well as interests, psychic. So in other words, both within the person and in the relationship, what are the drivers here? What's reinforcing this? What has led to it? And long-term affairs oftentimes involve what Frank Pittman many years ago called marital arrangements, where people, you know, they don't want to necessarily get divorced, they're unhappy in their relationship, they end up finding another relationship where they kind of go to meet certain desires or needs rather than working it out in a primary relationship. Sometimes the other partner, the other spouse knows about it or suspects it, but doesn't want to know.
Right.
And just kind of wants to let it be. Okay. Other times the partner has no idea, okay, what's happening and that it's been going on. And it's a huge, huge, huge betrayal. These long-term affairs, sometimes they'll go on for 10, 12, 15 years. They can be very difficult to get stopped. And one of the things you do need to do is to make sure that whatever you're working with is the affair is stopped. And if it hasn't stopped, it's very difficult to do good EFT until you get it stopped. You know, you need to get it focused on getting it stopped. And that it's not uncommon for people to come in and say, but I'm in love with the other man, I'm in love with the other woman. You know, I don't know that I want to end it. And so you kind of start taking that apart to make sense out of it. One of the big drivers of affairs is secrecy.
Yeah.
And secrecy kind of allows, and one of the things about affairs is affairs end up being a very thin slice of life. It's not whole life. When you're in a relationship that is outwardly committed, when you're married or in other types of committed relationships, you are working outwardly and openly on building a life together. When you're having an affair that's secret, typically it is very narrow in the way you interact. You may text and communicate and sneak around, meet up, etc. But you're not building a life together, which makes it very thin and oftentimes deceptive. It allows people to kind of feel like they're falling in love because there isn't a lot of risk. When you have an affair, you know you're not supposed to be doing it, which means you can end it at any time. You know, I say it's kind of like being on an airplane when you talk to somebody. You can open up and talk to somebody on an airplane because you know as soon as it lands, you're not going to see them anymore. Okay? People a lot of times will have affairs and they'll open up, they'll share, because they know that they're not supposed to be doing it, and they can end it at any time. That allows them to go deep. But then people get mixed up, and they feel so much love and care, and you've got sex involved, etc. They don't understand that it's a narrow slice of life. Helping them understand that can be helpful. And helping them understand that if they're ever going to have a full, connected, loving, safe relationship with anybody, it's got to be real and open, and it's got to be whole, not just a thin slice.
Right.
So that's a metaphor I use. I mean, I've used other ones. It's like, you know, you're taking the ice cream, you're not taking the full cake. You know, you're taking the frosting, you're not taking the full cake. Or you're eating the dessert, you're not eating the main course here. You know, and sure, you like the dessert, but if all you get is the dessert, you'll get sick. You know, there's lots of metaphors you can use.
Yeah, there's some really great metaphors to that. I think some of the research really holds to the truth of those types of metaphors, because when affair partners recouple or leave their current partners to marry or to commit to each other, there's a really high, like the highest split up rate of any population. Well, not any population, because I think parents who've had children that they've lost children have really high rates too, but it doesn't necessarily go that smooth or that well for those partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it doesn't. It's oftentimes very difficult because they have to build a full life. But anyway, you got to figure out why the affair is happening and how to get it stopped. And
so part of that is really an assessment as you enter. And I think sometimes one of the things that happens when couples come in with crisis is that we can skip over assessment. In fact, I think we have a tendency to do it maybe anyway, or we haven't been taught how to do a good assessment or something. I'm not sure what it is, as I teach core skills, around in different places. And I kind of am that's kind of a conclusion I've been coming to this past couple of years, that we find the cycle work and the cycle and getting to that so effective that we'll often just skip over really doing assessment outside of doing a cycle assessment. And really you've got to step back and get that assessment done. So you know what type of affair it was, how it came about, where they are, what are some of their sensitivities, and really do a good couple assessment.
What function the affair may be serving intrapsychically and interpersonally. What it may be doing for the person having the affair, what needs, desires it may be fulfilling, and what it's doing in the relationship, okay, or what it did, for example.
So those are helpful things to do. Let's see, so let's go. There's some questions coming up in the chat box here that one of them is, when you have an offending partner, this is having to do with long-term affairs, and they've given up the long-term affair, but they're grieving it, and they don't feel like they have a right to grieve it, or the partner certainly doesn't want to hear about the grief of losing the affair partner.
Over the previous,
yes.
Yeah, right. That can be tricky and difficult. Again, I think contextualizing it in terms of, the feelings are very real and powerful, but contextualizing it as being thin, or as being the ice cream and not the real meal, can be helpful. I think also, framing it as something that they have to mourn, but it's not necessarily appropriate to be mourning in front of their partner. And the real question is can they mourn it? It's one of the places where individual therapy can be helpful if you have a good individual therapist. Helping them kind of go through the mourning process. What my experience has been is that the more people start to understand kind of the shallowness of the affair, even though it felt deep and powerful, the more they start to understand how removed from real life it is and how much substance it didn't have.
Yeah.
The easier it is to start to kind of story or reframe what has happened for them, and it's easier to let go of. On the other hand, as they start to build a loving, connected relationship with their primary partner, that is also really helpful for them, okay? I will, in the absence of individual therapy, you know, or something that's going to work, because again, individual therapy can really undermine the couple's work if you're not careful. I will intersperse the couple work with occasional individual sessions. Yeah. And sometimes I'll recommend that people kind of go through morning rituals, you know, that they write up about, you know, what the relationship really was and wasn't and what they thought it was. And maybe they bury it someplace, you know, or whatever, so they can let go of it and really work on creating a loving, connected relationship with their partner.
One of the things that I've found, and that you can do some grieving in the room with the offending partner grief, when you can link the grief to, I mean, both fear and grief, because something comes alive in that affair for many people, not everyone, you know, but sometimes there's this part of themselves that either isn't alive in their relationship, or maybe they didn't even know that they had or had the capacity for. And oftentimes there's a grief like, okay, I'll give that up because this relationship's more important. But so many times when you can couple the fear of losing this part of themselves that came alive, so it's not focused on the partner and it's more focused on their intrapsychic process, you know, and that they grieve that they never had that they didn't have it in this relationship, that they want to have that and they don't want to lose that part of them, then I found partners really respond to hearing that grief when it's framed around those ways.
Absolutely. And I think that once people are kind of past the trauma of the initial trauma, if that makes sense, and they start, as they start to do their own grieving, you know, the faithful partner, and as they become more stable, a lot of times they can hear it through the lenses of, this is something that my partner had, he or she had this experience because he or she was hurting or missing or didn't know how to reach or whatever. And of course they're going to miss it. And maybe this is an opportunity. I've had some people say, this is an opportunity for us to create in our relationship what you were trying to get in another relationship.
Yeah,
which is huge. When people get to that level, it's huge. And I've had some people, I mean, I work, some of you may have seen, because I've showed this case when I do workshops sometimes, but you know, a case that I saw in another country where the man had a child by his mistress. And there was a lot of very difficult situations involved, but the child ended up being gone. The man was pining over the child, but his wife was able to, and they had a child of their own that died, a lot of death and loss. But, you know, this wife was able to, you know, at Christmas time, light a candle for the other child, the other daughter of her husband that had been lost. Now, she was able to do that.
Wow.
Which was huge. I mean, it was just a huge thing. And she was able to do that because she recognized that it wasn't about her. It was about a loss that he had, both of this child as well as the child that they had together that died, and he never grieved. They never grieved together over. Anyways, it was a complicated case, but, and if you're in any of my affairs workshops, I will go into more detail on that one. But anyway, there's lots of things that can happen in terms of having that mourning come into the couples therapy itself, but you've got to have people kind of out of the initial shock stage before that can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not part of the crisis work, right? That's when you're they're a little more stable and you're starting to understand what happened, getting that context under them, and where they currently are, you know, what's kind of happening to them now that can be blocks, and as they're starting to open up more to each other. You mentioned, and there's a question in the chat box about how can individual therapy, you know, become troublesome to couple therapy? We've seen a lot of that.
I have, yeah. I would say very easily. that's not quite the question. It's very easy for an individual therapist, and even when we're systemically trained, it's even good EFT therapists, it's easy for this to happen, but particularly if people haven't had systemic training, it's very easy to only see the relationship through the eyes of the client that you're working with. And we all naturally want to have our clients get out of their pain. So it's easy to start taking sides, if you will. And one of those sides is against the relationship or against the marriage. And, you know, we struggle in general with couples therapists not believing that couples can change. But a lot of times, you know, and that's one of the battles in training, you know, and learning EFT is you've got to believe that actually highly distressed couples can turn around. They don't all do it, okay, but they can. Individual therapists struggle with that even more. It's just clearly, I mean, he cheated on you, she cheated on you, why are you still here? Okay, that's the easy, I can't believe you're staying here, you know? You don't have to stay in this marriage. I mean, there's lots of different ways of undermining the work of couples therapy. Or, I remember an individual therapist calling me up once with permission and starting to say, you know, clearly the wife, he was the man's individual therapist, clearly the wife, clearly she has an explosive disorder. Why don't you have her in anger management? What's going on? And he got really angry with me over the supposed anger problems of this wife, who he had never seen. And he diagnosed the wife, decided what the problem was, and of course his client was just an innocent bystander victim. And you know, that's the danger, okay? And so having somebody who's, go ahead.
That having to keep that relational frame, and it's so easy. I mean, even us, if we see one partner a lot more, like in between, if we're interspersing individual and couple therapy, it's not that we want to, but just naturally who we're going to spend time with and listen to and be empathic with, that bias is going to start to build in. And then we have, you know, as humans, kind of a negative attributional bias anyway under threat or difficult circumstance. If you're an individual therapist and you see your client just struggling, it's very easy and even natural to just start to side up with them. And that can really undermine the relational frame.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think I interrupted you. You were going to say something else too.
No, I think I was done.
Okay. All right, so let's go to the next question. I want to get to these questions that people submitted in advance because I really appreciate them, you know, registering and submitting. And so there's this question about shame, really, when that kind of shame takes over. They can't talk about the affair. They can't talk about their feelings because the shame, you know, is up and running and it's so hot, and they just shut down. So let's talk about some ways that we deal with that. And this ties into something in the chat box where someone asked me to mention something about the 3 amigos, which was from a posting on the EFT listserv I mentioned not too long ago. Yeah,
okay. Right, so I think when people are just shut down, I mean, a lot of times it's shame, right? But sometimes they're just scared that their partner is going to freak out and be angry and go into more blaming. And if it's really fear of the reaction of the partner, you know, rather.
So they're like being cautious. I don't want to do. It's not necessarily shame. They can just be I want to avoid another confrontation. Fighting's not going to do us any good. I don't want to give you more info to, you know, beat me up with, and I just don't want to see you go into more raging. That's a different thing, right?
Exactly. And so that's a different thing. And that, you know, you have to be able to create safety in the session and process that they're scared, you know, and that's part of the negative cycle, which just got worse because of the affair, right? Typically. If it is shame, though, helping people know that you see them as people, that you see them as good people, not as betrayers, okay? Not as bad, evil people. May have done something bad. Again, some people will try and say, well, what you did really wasn't bad. To me, that's not helpful. I don't say what you did is horrible. I just don't go to that level. When I go to the level, because usually they can see all the pain anyway, right? And clearly what they did created all sorts of pain and suffering. I go to the level of they are good people, and I think I said this before, it's the reframe around they are good people, which is why they feel bad about it. They have shame because really underneath, they may not be able to feel it or touch it, but they have shame because they are good people. Right. They are, in fact, they can be the source of healing for their partner. That's really important. When people are completely shut down in a couple session, though, I will go to an individual session to see what I can do to kind of bring them up. And, you know, doing the regular shame stuff, you know, Becca does these wonderful trainings on shame. But doing the regular shame kind of work, helping people identify it, what does it mean, helping normalize it, really working with your shame, you know, kind of your general shame work, at that point can be quite effective. But you got to get there to begin with.
Right.
So. Yes.
So those are really helpful things. And so one of the things that I do when there's shame is, and what I was talking about in the blog, I said I would expand on, or in the post, which is a blog on my website as well, is I don't know if you remember that movie, the three amigos, but so there's a storyline kind of behind calling these emotions the three amigos, because sadness, shame, and fear, shame kind of clings to these other two emotions because fear is the first, you know, the activator. And then when we're facing loss, there's sadness. And shame clings to both of those because fear and loss are a big part of why people feel broken. They've been isolated, had a lot of loss, and, you know, shame is that sense of feeling broken, damaged goods. I can't ever heal. Something's just inherently wrong with me. So because the other ones are connected in, you can acknowledge that shame and then go over to one of the other parts that are really close as kind of a way out. So you feel bad and broken, and I guess there's also some sadness mixed with that. So I may just ask something like that, or you know, I guess you're afraid that if you showed up or if you did something, it's going to go bad again, or you're afraid it's true, you're really broken and this is irreparable. So I may do kind of a probing question around one of those other affects that helps people kind of come back, you know, shift out of shame, and then they can start to be more responsive. And they don't have to be in the shame and overwhelmed by it. There's, you know, that's one of the ways that I use to kind of help diffuse the shame and bring them to another emotion. And then you're going to do some perspective taking as well, because we lose perspective when we get in absorbing negative emotion, whatever negative affect it is that's absorbing, we lose perspective. So I'm going to be with it, try to explore one of the emotions close to it, help them gain their footing that way, and then do some perspective taking around it. And thanks for all the cheers about the online shame training. It's still available, and it's really nice. Did that with Jim Thomas, so it was a lot of fun. So there's some questions coming in here, Scott, about details and lies. You know, both. On one side, we have the partner who's not disclosing, actively lying many times, sometimes not so actively lying as omitting, you know, details in that kind of fear state that you're talking about, trying not to make things worse. And then the other partner who's, you know, got to know more. So let's talk about both of those aspects.
Okay. Yeah, I think you said it right. I mean, a lot of times people are lying because they're afraid. Again, it doesn't make the lying helpful or okay, but if you understand the fear, you can help you kind of ward off the lying, because essentially much of the damage that occurs in affairs is about the betraying and the lying. It's the lying that tends to be one of the biggest factors. Consequently, getting people to get honest is really important. And I lean on people pretty heavily. Usually they're scared. And they're scared both because they don't want to face it internally, and they also are afraid of where their partner is. The whole detail thing ties into this quite well, because usually partners want to know and they have a need to know. And part of this is they just found out that there is another person, another man or a woman in their relationship, in their marriage, in their life that they had no idea was there. And they are trying to figure out, where was he? Where was she? Right. What was going on? Where, when, how, and etc. And it's actually
well, it's such a reality shake, right? Because as we're going through life and building memories and storing memory, that then we find out, especially in the long-term affairs, that everything I thought was true isn't really true. So then that hunt for reality again. So when you were at my birthday and you left, or you said all those times you went to the office, and then oh, you mean even on that event when you went to the office? Were you at the office, or were you doing that? So there's something that it's so destabilizing, that much of that seek for information has to do with kind of trying to get their feet back on the ground.
Exactly. It's about reorganizing and understanding really the degree of the damage. And, with electronics these days, I mean, I had one recently where she figured out that on New Year's night, they made love. She remembered it. And she remembers him afterwards leaning over and getting over on his phone. Well, she checked the phone records, and he was texting his girlfriend. Okay, right after they had made love. Very, very, very painful. The tricky part is, yes, people need to get open and honest about details, etc. The problem with details is when the person asking the questions are asking at what I would call the wrong level. Okay, people can get caught up in the details of, and how was the sex with her on this occasion, and what did it feel like to have his penis inside of you, and those kinds of things, which are they're traumatizing, and they're obsessional questions, not organizing questions.
That's right. So you got it. That's what you have to listen to in the questions, as far as what kind of because when it comes to disclosures and telling the truth, that's the other part that we're encouraging, but it has to be at the right level or it adds trauma. So I want to punctuate that, because this is an important part for people to learn and to pay attention to, about the level, what kinds of responses and questions help, what kind of disclosures help versus which ones don't.
Yes, exactly. Obsessed questions versus organizing questions. And really the effects of that are, does this help the person organize? Does it ultimately bring healing? Or is it stuck at a level that really isn't the issue? Is it really about, how the sex felt? Or is it about how important I am? Or why I wasn't so important in this moment? Or will I ever be good enough in the bedroom? And a lot of times when I start to see those obsessional questions, I will start to drill down on maybe what they really need to be asking, and help them start to ask those kind of questions, which are attachment-based questions, which are, am I important? Can I ever feel like you were going to want me if, he was this way or better in bed than I was or whatever, okay? Can I ever trust this again? And when you bring it down to attachment-oriented questions, the level changes and it doesn't become obsessional. I mean, it moves off the obsessional stuff because you're getting down to the right level.
Very helpful. That's very helpful. And so one of the things that I find difficult, which I'm sure people find difficult and took me a while to kind of be able to do fairly well, I guess, maybe sometimes still not as well as other times, is when those obsessional questions come in and they're so particular and they're, they also point at us like, how come you won't help me, have them tell me this or have them tell me that, right? Because they can also put a lot of demand, a lot of pressure. So when we feel that, that's an important thing to pay attention to. That because that's such a highly triggered response, and if we meet it, we need to recognize it being at that level so we can recognize the urgency and the pressure and the stress and the distress, and then start to pay attention to what's the driver for that.
What's the real question?
So that we're just not, what's the real question? So we're not just stuck on particular content.
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't get stuck on the content. And our sense of when we're starting to feel pushed is a very good kind of indicator that the questions are probably not at the right level to bring healing and to bring, kind of the organizing influence that's needed, or understanding that's needed to bring healing.
Well, of course, time is coming to a close so quickly here, Scott, as they tend to do on our trainer talks. It comes and goes so fast because the topics are so rich. And of course, we do several day trainings on these topics. So it's nice to be able to just hit a couple questions and, get a little EFT nudge and reassurance as we're doing some of these things. Any kinds of things. There were a couple questions. I don't know. I mean, we really kind of are out of time, but is there anything else that you wanted to say in working with affairs, that has helped you through the learning process itself?
Well, I think there's lots of things that I've learned that have helped me. Certainly EFT in general has helped. And then, of course, reading the books have been helpful. Really, for me, watching couples heal and overcome the effects of affairs and move forward has helped me know that it can happen. And I think we absolutely need to believe in that. Understanding that people won't let go and forgive unless both they feel deeply heard and understood in their pain and cared about, and also they have a good assurance that it's not going to happen again. And they have reason to believe it's not going to happen again. And when people don't know why they had the affair, they don't really understand it, then you can't figure out why it's not going to happen again. And then you've got a serious problem. And it's not going to get better. Once you start understanding why they happen, you can lead people into figuring out how it's not going to happen again. And it just helps in the whole healing process. So.
Right.